Okay, now let's create some to-dos. Let's go back here and just close all this. /account, I'm just going to use part of this login script right here. Div h2 add to-do. Now, form, we have a to-do, input type text name equals, let's see what kind of to-do, what kind of fields. Name, to-do name. Then we have a text, which is things to do, and text, and then we have is done. And we're going to keep it as a text, and I'll let you know why. Okay. Create to do. Okay. Inside our ugly script tag, we're just going to fetch this add to the form. Prevent default false. Okay. So we're just going to copy this fetcher here from the previous example script, and we're going to use it for payload equals, and let's just add. Okay, so go with name, input, name equals name, now text, input, name is text, now, and is done, input, name equals is done, dot now. Also the payload, see if it works. Text is done, none, 1, 2, alright, so we're just gonna use the fetcher API above and send out, let's say, to-do.create with this payload. And then we're just gonna refresh, reload, and new location, catch, just doesn't know yet that we can do ES6. Okay. Alright. Test 1. Now we're going to get here error call, the requested resource was not found because we don't have any kind of action to handle to-do.create. So going back to our actions here, let's just create a file called to-do.js, use the same dispatcher and store, and then just go with dispatcher. No, yeah, let's just go with dispatcher dot add action to-do.create. I'm just gonna use the authorization session.account so that only logged in accounts can create a to-do. And at this point, we can actually create the to-do object. So let's just go with to-do equals store model to-do. Let's just go with another calls as before. Calls, push, and you're going to see later on why. If E return next E. otherwise intent object result to do object modify soon, and let to do object equals just like this. To do object equals to do build input. Now, even though, so because I'm using this intent object at input, this function will return me the sanitized unified input data object that my action is going to use, had defined that it needs in order to work properly. So in this case, in this action right here, the intent object's input is actually going to be an empty object because my action doesn't have any kind of input defined in it. So even though I'm going to send out, let's see here, even though I'm going to send out data here, if you look here, we have an empty object because the intent's main concern is to always provide valid input data. So because our action doesn't have any kind of input defined, the intent's input function will always return an empty object. This is to prevent cases where, for example, you would want to create a to-do and there's a field called account ID in your model, right? So if I were to send the account ID in the actual payload in my request, like account ID here, let's say 2, even though I'm account ID 1, if I would just use this function to build my to-do based on the actual input provided, then even though I am account 1, I would be creating to-dos for account 2, which is not okay. So in order to avoid all this, to get the account from the data. So in order to avoid that, the intent object's input always returns the sanitized input object that the action works with. We also have a raw input here, a raw input property in the intent, which will actually just use the entire object. Sorry, not here. Here. It will actually use the entire object, the entire payload that is sent by the client. So in this case, it sends out 3 properties, but in my case, where I use just input, it has 0 properties, 0 keys inside the input because, again, it's sanitized, so this is very important. Okay, so, right, what I can do is, inside my action, I can actually modify the input that I want to use down the stack. So I'm just going to say intent object, input, account ID, and I'm going to use my own ID, so that when I build a to-do, it's going to use my ID and the other information within an input. So calling this, we're going to see here in a second, we have tests, things to do, stuff. And is it done? 2. What actually happened is, why didn't it happen? To do dot create. Let's go inside the database and see here. Yes. Yes. So what it did is it created an empty to-do because it didn't have any kind of, here, this is the one. You see an insert there.
There's no input.
Yeah, there's no input, so it created an empty to-do. So this is bad. That's why we're going to add here a input sanitizer. We're going to use, I'm going to say name, validate string, text dispatcher validate string and is done dispatcher validate bool. Okay, so at this point we're going to have some valid input data. I'm just going to put it here like this. And for this example, I'm going to explicitly attach this input, this account ID here. ID, so that you will know. Alright, so like this. Let's just restart here. Go back to our app. Test 1, 2, 3. Is it done? No. Let's see here. What happened? An error occurred. Alright. Yes, my bad.
You removed that line.
Sorry about that. And where we're building the data, we're just going to pass this input data here. Restart everything. Again, I've made an error there, but in most, if we're going to talk about a bit about errors, in most applications, this stack trace is going to reach the end user. Here it's not going to reach the end user. It's just going to be logged into the console, and some applications, some framers, for example Express, doesn't even try to handle any kind of error within your route. So at some point your application might actually crash and not just send an error to the client. So let's just try and create a to-do and see what happened here. So we see here that we inserted an actual to-do here with these values. Alright, we go inside the database and we see here the new to-do, but the account ID is still null. Now, why is that? Yes. So this is because we placed account ID inside the input, but account ID isn't actually a field, isn't defined as a field in our model. It's more like defined as a relationship with the account model. So in order to place the account ID inside the actual to-do object, you can either do, once you've built your to-do, you could either do to-do.set account ID, account object.id, or to-do.set account and give the entire account object. Right? So this is how when the build function is called on a model, it will look inside its fields and match the keys from the object that you give with the fields that are defined, excluding the actual relationships with other models. So this is why you would have to explicitly call the set function to set a reference to another model, or set the actual field that is used by the other model's reference, by the other model as a reference. So I usually go with the first one because it's a bit more explicit, but you can also do the other one, so it's up to you. So let's go back here, and when we're creating a to-do 5 is this? Test, is it done? 1. Create a to-do, go back in the database. Why is it still under?
So it's in account object session.id.
Account object.id. In our session middleware, what does our session middleware do? Of course. So our session, this is a bad typo of mine. I put intent instead of intent.session. Sorry, instead of the account object right here. So that was a bad mistake on my end, but again, sorry. To do 6, test 6, text 6, done 1, create a to do, and finally we have a to do account ID reference here. Good. We can see here that it was inserted, the data that was inserted, it got inserted. We can see the created add field and all this additional information. Now, what I wanted to show you is the way, in our example here, in our to-do action, we have is done, which is a Boolean validated value. So the way the Boolean validator works is, if we have an input which is equal to 0, the string false, or actual false value, is going to be set to false. Otherwise, it's going to be set to true. So whenever I use this is done 0, test, is going to create a to-do with is done 0. If I'm going to say false, it's going to create with still 0, because false as a string is 0. Is false as a value in Thorin. So we can either use this data, this action here to create a to-do, or, as I said earlier, I'm just going to rename it to create to. Our store actually has some cool built-in functionality that will actually create, one sec. It will actually try and do this for us without any kind of, let me show you. So I'm going to go call store, restify the account, the model name, which in this case is account, do a create on it, and use authorization session account and filter create not after to do object, and also we're going to use we're going to restify the to do model, not the account one. Also created to do ID. So let's see what happens when we use this. Right before, the only thing we still need to do is filter create before to do dot set count ID session count dot ID. I'm going to explain later what happens here. We start everything. We're going to see here restify and create the model to do. Name restify, okay. Is it done? 1 create to do, and we're going to go inside the database, and we see that the model was actually created by this store. So what does this mean for us? That means that the SQL store provides a functionality called restify, which it can actually create all this action that we define here. It does that automatically for the model that you say you want to restify. So essentially I'm saying, okay, I have this to-do model, and I want you to create an action called to-do.create, and I want you to use this authorization before you actually try to create that object, and attach all, make the request, require input data, the name, the text, and is done, validate the input data, create a to-do object, and save it. Do all that for me while I just sit here and collect. Cool. So, if we're going to look inside the SQL store here, there's something called restify model, and there's a thing that is called filters. So we have a couple of filters for create. What are filters? Filters are functions that are called in specific times when something is happening. So in our case here, I have filter create.before. This filter, so actually this function here, is going to be called once the action that was created by the restification of the to-do for create operations. So that action is essentially was injected in my application. It handled all the input data, the validation, and then it created a to-do object. So essentially it did this automatically, and it did this. And once it did this, right before it's going to call to-do.save, it is going to fire a filter called create.before. And this filter is, well, it's synchronous, but it receives the intent object as the first parameter, and the second and the to-do object or the newly created model as the second one. So I can alter everything here. Once it saves the actual newly created object, in this case to-do object, it fires the create.after. So if we're going to look here, the create.after filter just outputted created 7. So we can actually just remove this and just leave these 5 lines of code here, and it's still going to work. Let's go back. Is it done? One. It worked. It added my to-do, and just, well, essentially 5 lines of code. Now we can do this. The restify functionality of the SQL store has this kind of functionality built in for create, read, find, and update. So crudef is how I call it. So I'm just going to go like store restify. Let's try to create an action that will return all my to-dos, right? Simple. To do, we're going to work with the to-do model, the find restify action, still just for authorized users only. There's a filter called filter of find.before, and this is interesting. What happens when you want to find an array of to-dos? Right? You go select star from to-do where. Now that where by default is empty, and the restify to-do find functionality creates an empty query, which will then pass when it calls the find.before filter. So this is where we actually have access to the query before it is sent to the database, and we can do something like this. Query.count ID equals intent session count. This is where we actually managed to alter the query right before it hits the database, so that we are certain that the user only receives his to-dos and nobody else's. Now we can alter the query however we want, but for now let's just go with this. As you see here, we created to-do.find, and we're just going to use postman for this one. I'm just going to call type to-do.find with empty payload. Send. On the back end, we see here the to-do.find started, and it did 3 queries. The first query is called by the account middleware, authorization middleware, check if we're logged in. The second query is doing a count on the number of to-dos that the account has. And query, sorry, I have a small bug here. Instead of query.account, we have to have query.where equals, and then we have this. Again, the query syntax is the SQLized query syntax, so you can find more about it. If we reset, redo the fetch, and we're going to see here, this is where to-do account ID equals 2. And we have an order by default, so essentially what it does is this. This is the result that we receive. We receive a meta, some meta information about it. So it essentially tells us that there are a total of 5 to-dos. You're on the first page. The current count on this page is 5 items. The current page is 1. And this is the result. The result is the actual array of to-dos and only the user's to-dos, right? Pretty simple. Now, what we can do is, let's try to filter them. So we have here to-dos that are done, 1 to-do, 2 to-dos that are done, 3 to-dos, 3 done to-dos. Now let's, in the payload, let's just say, okay, I want all the to-dos that are done. And is done, sorry, yes. In order for this to happen, we're going to go into the to-do here, and we're just going to add filter true. The object that you send right next to the field's type are different options that you can attach to the actual field. So filter true tells me that I can actually, when I'm using Restify, I can filter based on that field. So let's do this request again. It's still 5. Why is it that? I think I have to go inside the code. Fine. It's been a while since I used this also. Yes. Let's go 1 sec. Filter is done. And payload, let's make it false. Still 5. So there's something fishy going on here. It's not popping in my why it's doing this, but essentially you can be doing this. You can just
Could you console log the query or something?
Yeah, I can console log the query. Let's see here, what's the input that we're having? This is the query, is done false. So the query is for the limit, and then we have the input where is done is false.
You just saw about the query shouldn't it be just adding an attribute to it?
I think there's a small problem here in here. I think there's a problem with the actual Boolean filtering. If we're just going to go back to our model and move this from is done, let's move it to name, and hopefully it's going to work. So let's fetch a random name, 226. We're going to query by the name 226. Still, something's missing, and there's something going on here that's probably missing, and I've done something wrong. But once the full documentation is finished, this kind of things is probably not going to happen. The idea is that it offers out-of-the-box pagination, because you have a total count, page count, and current page. And if I'm going to send inside the payload page number 2, it's going to start the query from position number 10. Yes. because we don't have 11 items in our query, we just have 5. The result is an empty array. But it has pagination out of the box. So going back to our example, we have to-do.create, to-do.find. Let's go with restify, to-do.read, and add this also. And filter, again the same filter, read.before. We have intent object, and then we have query. And then we're going to use the same, actually we're just going to call it function alter account query here. Intent object next. Just move this bit here, from here to here, so that we're not going to duplicate the code. Right before reading, we're just going to pass this function, and before finding, we're going to pass this function, and it should be okay. And if we're still here, we're just going to try and have the delete endpoint, and we have delete.before, and also, why not, the update, and we have update.before. So when you start, you see that you have your restifying, create, read, delete, update, and find the model to do. To do find still works. We still receive. It doesn't. Okay, because we have here an intent object instead of next. We have query. Good catch. No, good catch. All right. Calling it will return us the same result. If we're going to go with to-do.read, it's going to ask us for a to-do ID. So let's go into the database and get the normal to-do ID. Let's go with 3, for example. To-do ID 4, 3, 4. ID 4. Okay, yes. To-do ID 4. Yes. So to ID 4, it is going to just simply just do the query. Do the query for me. Oh my God!
Number 3.
I know why.
Have an account ID.
Yes. So this is essentially a bug in my code again. Doing this will actually replace the previous query, the previous where object with a new object.
Yeah.
So we were essentially all the where object.
That's why you
query.
have.
Yeah, that is why we were just destroying. It's like, yeah, I don't need your where query. I'm just gonna use mine.
Where ID is account ID.
Okay, so query dot where dot account ID equals this, and we also found a bug today. We just fixed it. Going on to reading to-do ID number 4, if we go inside the query, you see here to-do.id equals 4. If we're going to go with to-do ID 3, we're going to receive a not found. Why? Because to-do ID number 3 doesn't have an account ID, and based on the query that we just executed, where to-do.id equals 3 and account ID is 2. So we have an and there. Let's go on and check the to-do.find. So, alright, we also have this, and let's go with name, with this name, TT dosex. Send out, yes, so the filtering works. I knew it worked, but you know, I was testing you guys. Right, so we have this result here, and if we go back in our example in the to-do model, let's add this filter through here. And because we're using the other restification endpoint, the functions called update, I'm just going to add update true here, and update false here, and also update. Actually, I'm just going to replace this one also. So just like filter through, this essentially tells the store when it's restifying a model, hey, you can actually filter this model based on this field. Update through says, hey, you can actually update this field when an update restify action is occurring. You may have some fields that you do not want to update. For example, I don't know, insert field, private field here, but still, this is a useful, nice to have thing. Go back and send out a to-do.read. Okay, let's go with to-do.read, and then we have ID 4, right? So we're sending this is our to-do. Let's send out to-do.update, where we're going to send ID 4, and we want to update from is done, from true, false. Send out, we have this update query here, update to do set is done false, account ID null, account ID null, where ID is 4. Okay, this is because here we also have to specify private true. When a belongs to relationship is defined, you mostly want that to be private true because you don't want people to actually change any kind of relationships automatically. So going back to our database, let's just change from 4 to 2 and send out from is done from false to true. We're going to say here set. Something is happening weird here again. Something is happening here. Let's go back and using it. This is what happens when you code and people are watching you. You tend to make mistakes.
Conspiracy.
Set is done true. Yes, finally. Okay, so we've updated our model. A method key appeared here. It says change is true. This is the result once the to-do is updated. And we have a create, read, delete, update, and find in 35 lines of code. And what we can do again is let's just add an alias /to-do/ID. Because the HTTP transfer port is built on top of Express, we also have these kind of dynamic routing that we have access to. So in Express, this part here /ID, this is considered as an actual URL parameter. So if I'm gonna go and access /to-do/4, it's not found because there is no to-do4 with my account ID. But if I go over to 5, this is our actual to-do. Now, because it's not, because the action doesn't have any kind of rendering attached to it, it's just going to return the simple JSON. And this is an example where the input data is merged into a single object from different types of sources. In this case, our source is the URL parameter, right? So we can just go with, let's go for find. We want to do an alias to get /to-do, to-do-s, /to-dos, and here is /to-dos/ID. And and just place this one in front of the other.
Why?
Because in Express, the routing system is handled from the beginning to the end, so it's essentially an array. And the first match inside that array is the route that is used, right? So this is why I want to-dos to be first and to-do/id to be the second, because I want to match find first. This is going to return all my to-dos. And if I access to-do/8, for example, this is going to be my 8th to-do. I can do exactly the same thing to, let's see, create. So this is a post/to-dos, and update, this is a put/to-dos, or post/to-do/id. You can just, I guess, post/to-do/id. So we already have either a put or a post for to-do/id, both running the same to-do.update action. Okay, so we have the create, read, update, delete of to-do, and now what we can do is maybe take a little break.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, and after we come back, I'm gonna prepare the discovery system where we can have a different type of node app that's gonna work with the first node app, essentially simulating a small microservice architecture. All right. Cool. So take 10.